Welcome everyone. Wow, that was very quick. Thank you very much. It's so good to see the public service out for our sort of annual address from the Premier. Thank you so much for joining us on what is a cooler day today, but really terrific views here at the Adelaide Oval. I think most of you know me. I'm Erma Ranieri, Commissioner for Public Sector Employment, and I'm also IPAA SA President, and thank you so much to the IPAA people for organising all of this and our agencies. I want to acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Kaurna people today. I'd like to pay my respects to their spiritual relationship with their country. I also want to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Most importantly, I'd like to welcome a very good friend of mine, Mickey O'Brien, to deliver today's Welcome to Country. Please welcome Mickey.
Thank you for that, Erma. Namani ni puna is the hello words in the language of the Kaurna people, saying hello to you, my friends. And hopefully you're well today, and so therefore, if you say mani ai, that is you are well, mani yaka if you're not well. So, namani. Nature. Tuela manibudnik. Tuela wakanapadnik. Nai Kaurna biako maklankla marwachanga Kaurna miena. Minyana mani puraji nai narika matpi marriage nai wangadi mani budni gani yatana irindi yata tanda wama tandendanga karawirapara nadluku warapalendi kamanka. It is wonderful to welcome you here today to the place of the Kangaroo Plains, here alongside the Red Gum Forest River, on the spirit place of the Red Kangaroo, being on the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We call upon the spirit people of our ancestors to bring you good blessings here this morning, to send away the sad or the old that can sometimes follow us. But we have always welcomed people to a place. Why? Because it's about understanding what is a welcome. A welcome is understanding what is country. Country is made up of many things. It is made up of culture. It is made up, obviously, of our family. It is made up of a journey. It is made up of these many things. Because when you understand that when you come to a place, it is about knowing a place, the ability to be connected to a place. Our people understood that no one person holds all of the knowledge, it is shared. And therefore, by welcoming people, we have this opportunity to share what we have, to learn, to exchange, because when we bring cultures together, it enables us to connect. And so, I don't know what's happened to my microphone, but hopefully you today have come to a place to understand why we come to this place. And when we come to a place, I come to this place this morning with a heavy heart. The reason being that South Australia is a wonderful place. It isn't just the home of myself and to many of you, or the place that you work or live. But when South Australia was formed, it was formed on a movement across the world, a movement called social conscience. And South Australia was a free colony, unlike the rest of this nation that is made up of penal colonies. Because that king of the day, the king that you don't know, which is embedded in the main street of this city, he wanted this place to be that place of difference, a place that understood that the First Nations peoples held an important place in this place. And so he wrote a letter that sadly sits in a wooden box on a shelf, a letter that said that the Aboriginal people were to be equal to those of the British citizens, but they must also have the enjoyment of the lands that they stood upon. Sadly, as we know, these things never happened to our people. And so we have continued to be on a movement. Our people have been the most patient, tolerant, giving and caring people. And as such, we have taught you many things. We still teach you many things. And therefore, we are in a time of change. a time where we have this opportunity to think. It is wonderful to welcome you, the people who serve our public, because that is in our name, as it is said. And as public servants, you are required to serve the government of the day, but more importantly, the people of the day. And we have an opportunity to really be reminded of what that really means. We have voices in regards to reconciliation action plans, which sadly I see many being awareness plans. We have much to do around racism and these things. They're all voices for concern and to think about, because we live in a democracy that says those with the largest voice have the largest say. We as Aboriginal people will never have that largest say. We make up less than 5%. But we did have one clause in our ability to do democracy, and that was we serve the minority first in our decision making. Therefore, we make all people equal. That is what it is about. And we have that opportunity to think about the minority groups, to understand the needs, to think about the First Nations people who don't have those voices. I'm not here to tell you to vote one way or another, but I do want to remind you of the importance of it, but also to remind you of history. Because the King's wishes were never fulfilled. And it is embedded in many things, not just in the letters patent that you don't see, but it was in the Common Seal of South Australia. Though we've got a Premier here today, he is not the head of this state. The Governor is. And as such, it also was in the flag of this state. And the flag of this state was this flag, this one that I've shown probably many a times, and it really symbolises what this is really about. You'll see that the lady from Britannia is reaching out. Her shield is on the ground, meaning peace. The Aboriginal person is sitting on a rock throne. She is reaching out to be welcome, to be accepted, to come in peace, to be bringing two cultures together. This is what this is about. This place has always been about this. So I leave you these final words. Mayunjiga, nachi yukandaya, nachi yakandaya, patnia do wadu is saying, let us continue to walk together, not alone, but alongside. Let us recognise cultures is about bringing us together. And then when we do so, we never say goodbye. We always say, see you later. Because we know that the physical is only ever temporary. We are all visitors to this place. But as our spiritual is what lives forever. It is what we leave behind that is most important. And therefore, take what you need, not what you want, so that we do have something for tomorrow. Nakara, Nechai. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mickey. And I want to also acknowledge I am sorry that you have such a heavy heart. The one thing I do want to say is that we really need to go back to serving. That is at the heart of what public service is about. And I've just picked out one of those values that we have in the public service, and that is respect. And therefore, we need to remind each other to look out for the people that are next to us, and always do it with a level of respect. So thank you so much, Mickey, for sharing your thoughts and your feelings with us today. That is, I believe, what a welcome is about. Okay, I'd like to welcome our South Australian Premier, the Honourable Peter Malinauskas, MP. As you can see from today's turnout, Premier, the public sector is very eager to hear what you have to say. So on behalf of the sector, thank you so much for taking time out to deliver today's address. Also want to thank all the people that made this possible, the Department of Premier and Cabinet, to my colleague Damien Walker, to my own office, and of course IPAA, who all work really hard to make this happen. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues, the Senior Leadership Council, who are the major partners for IPA, SA, and most of us are on the council as well. And to all the personal members, and I always do a shout out to Hedley. Thank you, Hedley, for being at every event almost that we have. It's lovely to have you here. Some housekeeping. Please place your mobile phones on silent. I hope mine is on silent, but we'll soon see. Follow the signs to the nearest bathroom. If there's an emergency, please follow the Adelaide Oval staff. I would appreciate it if we could avoid leaving during the discussion, but I understand if you have to leave, please do that in between perhaps questions and breaks. The Premier has and is keen to answer questions. You will see that we have some microphones. I'll start with a couple of questions. There were some from Slido, but I do want people to have a chance to ask the Premier questions that they might be wanting to ask today. So thank you so much for doing that. So let me introduce the Premier. The Premier I'm going to give an introduction first, led the South Australian Labor Party to victory at the March 22 state election. He has become the 47th Premier of South Australia. With a focus on health, education, jobs, skills and the environment, his government has outlined a very ambitious plan, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next generation. As a former minister in the Weatherall government, Peter held portfolios in police, correctional services, emergency services and road safety and health, mental health and substance abuse. He did enter Parliament as a member of the Legislative Council in 2015 before switching to the lower house as the elected member for Croydon. A few personal things. He does play footy, but I do see like he hangs up the football, then he goes out and plays with them again. So I'm not sure if he's retired or not. We might ask him that question. Well done, Premier. But his greatest love, of course, is his family. Peter and his wife Annabelle have 3 children, Sophie, Jack and Eliza, and they're preparing to welcome baby number 4 next month. Please welcome the Premier, Peter Malinauskas.
Thanks, Erma, for the warm introduction. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to hear from me. I would like to, of course, start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Kaurna people. Thank Uncle Mickey for his welcome to country. Of course, we do say that at an important time. We haven't had a referendum in Australia this century. We've got one in a couple of weeks' time. It's one that I believe is fundamentally important. Of course, it'll be up to every individual voter to have a say when they cast their ballots in the referendum. No one person's vote is worth more than another's. But for what it's worth, in my capacity as Premier, I am keenly advocating for a yes vote. This state's got a really proud tradition of being at the forefront of progressive change that was resisted and opposed at the time, starting right back in 1894, when we became the first place anywhere in the world, in the history of human civilization, to have truly universal franchise, granting women the right to vote and run for Parliament. And then almost every other progressive change since then that's occurred in this nation, often our state has led. Decriminalisation of homosexuality, the first jurisdiction to provide land rights to Aboriginal people. South Australia's always led. And we, of course, have been able to do that with initiating the South Australian voice to Parliament. And I hope that's something that we can emulate when the referendum and people cast their ballots in a few weeks' time. I want to have one prevailing message above all else for everybody that's in the room today, and that's my gratitude and thanks. I feel really privileged to be in this position of leadership. It's an unusual job. It brings with it a range of challenges, but also profound opportunities. But those opportunities are only able to be realised on the back of the work of thousands of people within our public sector. There are just over 110,000 of you who decide to wake up every day and dedicate yourself to public service. It isn't always recognised. It isn't always celebrated in the community. On occasions it is, but not uniformly. And our agenda, our ambitions for the state amount to nothing without your assistance and your hard work. My dad was a public servant himself. He worked at the Housing Trust his entire working life. And I guess I got to witness, as a young kid, got to witness how hard Dad worked, and he did work pretty bloody hard. But I also got to witness the extraordinary satisfaction that he was able to experience as a consequence of being in the public service, and a sense that he was contributing to something far bigger than himself. And I sincerely hope that you too enjoy that. And I also hope that over the course of our time together this morning, which is fleeting in the context of all the work that you put in over the course of the year, I also hope that you get a sense of what this government's agenda is, why it is meaningful and purposeful, and why you individually in each of your roles, regardless what department or agency you choose to serve in, helps contribute to that endeavour and that cause. To be able to enunciate what informs the government's policy agenda, it's always important to understand the why. I've got a great team in my office. They all work pretty hard. I've got a really good speechwriter. I didn't get a chance to spend a lot of time with him in advance of today's speech, and so he prepared something for me that I read last night, and it sort of dutifully goes through all of the policies that the government has and what we've been able to deliver and get in place over the course of the last 18 months. And whenever you hear politicians speak and they give a shopping list of all the things that they've done, it sort of loses a bit of context. It sometimes sounds a little self-serving when you do that. So what I thought, rather than just sort of, I'll get there eventually, but rather than kicking off with that, I just wanted to show you a bit of context and a few slides that are boring and dry, but hopefully mean something by the time I've finished explaining them. Now, I'm not too sure if this is going to work because we've had a few challenges, so let's see. There it is, it's working. Okay. All right. So, what is this? Every year, Harvard University measure economic complexity. Economic complexity matters because it speaks to what your economy is producing that the rest of the world takes from you because you do it better than elsewhere. So this is I'll just explain it. So this is the German economy, and as depicted by the Harvard Index of Economic Complexity. The colour of the box instructs the degree of economic complexity. So dark green means economic complex. The darker orange colour means very simple in terms of its economic complexity. So the size of the box in each of the boxes depicts the value of that particular industry in terms of its net exports to the German economy. So for instance, cars are economically complicated to produce. They take design function, they take a high degree of skills, and not surprisingly, they contribute an enormous amount to the German economy. So you've got a big box there in cars, and it's deeply complex, likewise with parts and so forth. What you can't see, because there's so much on here, is that there's a green square in the middle. That's serums and vaccines, and it goes on to ICT and a whole range of other industries. The more simple and less complex boxes there are things like basic commodities and tourism and the like. So this is the German economy. This is one of the most complex economies in the world. So what is this depicting? It's depicting what the German economy produces in both goods and services that they export to the rest of the world, and then divide us up in both quantum and quality in terms of economic complexity. If you produce something that is economically complex, your economy necessarily requires a greater degree of high-skilled labour to be able to do it. Now, why does that matter? Well, that matters because it reflects a standard of living through wages. The more complex, the higher the skills. The higher the skills, the better the remuneration, the better the security of one's work. So this is a graphical depiction of not just economic complexity, but economic complexity as a demonstration or a measure of the value of the output and where the economy is on the value chain of human capital. Does that make sense? It is hardly surprising that you see not just a lot of green, but a lot of boxes in the German economy, which is well known as being complex. High wage, high skilled jurisdiction, exporting their goods and services to the rest of the world. So the next slide is the Canadian economy. I'm pressing my button, there we go, okay. So Canada, very different to what Germany looks like. I like Canada because it's a good comparator to Australia. Similar geographically, similar in terms of size of population. Canada is the 9th largest population in the world. Australia is the 13th. Canada is of a similar size to us geographically. Their population is 35 million, 36 million. Ours is 26, 27. So we're very similar to Canada in most respects. Not surprisingly, in the Canadian economy, you see a lot more orange than you do in Germany, but you also start to see the size of the boxes increase, particularly for the uneconomically complex elements, petroleum, oils and crude being the best example of that. So Canada, different to Germany, that's something that we would reasonably expect to see given their geography and given their abundance in natural wealth through natural resources. Then you get to the Australian economy, and it's very different again. Now, what do we see here? Well, we see two things. We see, obviously, very little green. We see a lot of uncomplicated industries, but critically, what we also see is very few uncomplicated industries dominating the landscape in terms of our economic complexity. So it's not just the fact that we've got very little green, it's also the fact that the number of industries that we rely on for our national wealth is actually quite few. It's not just lacking complexity, it's few in nature. Now, when you show this graph to people, sometimes, and I didn't quite get this effect today, maybe because of the order, but people are sort of alarmed by this. And I don't necessarily think we should look at this chart with any degree of shame. The truth is that this economy that you see here has produced one of the best living standards anywhere in the world for any particular people. We have an exceptional standard of living in Australia. We are very fortunate to have that. We are a productive economy. So this isn't all bad. The question we've got to ask ourselves, and this is fundamental, is does this economy set up future generations of Australians to enjoy the same standard of living that we have been able to enjoy? And when you ask yourself that question and look at this chart, it does start to create a degree of alarm, because there are resources on here that we extract for the purposes of our national wealth that are going out of fashion fast. I'm particularly talking about fossil fuels. Now, regardless of what your view is about climate change, and I've got rather strong ones, regardless of what your view is, the simple fact is that global capital is now moving at pace away from fossil fuels, and the rest of the world is starting to want a lot less of them. And that is an unstoppable force now as the majority of people and a majority of governments decide to accept the science, which I think is virtuous. So coal, petroleum gases and the like, we will not be able to rely on these to produce national wealth in 20 years' time in the way that we do today. And that is not that far away. So the challenge that we've got as a country is to get, if we want to maintain our standard of living, if we want to remain a high wage, high growth economy, is to get more economic complexity in the system, more industries demanding high skilled, high wage, secure labour that is going to be able to replace the extractive industries on which we have become so dependent. That is the challenge. If we fail to meet this task and the rest of the world turns off fossil fuels and we've got no one to sell coal, oil or natural gas to, then we're going to be in a little bit of Barney Rubble trouble. So, this is the task, or one of the great challenges that exist before Australian policymakers today. Now, the good news for us in South Australia, that while this is the country's challenge, in many respects it is South Australia's opportunity. Because we don't produce coal. We don't mine coal in South Australia. We don't burn coal in South Australia for the purposes of our energy production. We have already led the transition as a state, and we are set to go a lot further. So what I want to talk to you is the two key elements that form the backbone or a key platform of the government's agenda that we are looking for you to contribute to. This is sort of maybe a bit hard to see, but this is obviously the state of South Australia. And in South Australia, we have got a few things that the rest of the world don't have. First thing is this: South Australia is home to the best coincident sun and solar resources that we see anywhere in the world. Other places have the wind, other places have the sun. We have both at the same locations. That is rare. Us, California, parts of Texas, parts of Saudi Arabia. That's pretty much it in terms of high quality economic sun and wind resources. We've got an extraordinary amount of that in the Upper Spencer Gulf. In the same place, we also happen to have the most critical minerals of critical minerals that will serve the electrification of the world globally to achieve decarbonisation, and that is copper. South Australia is home to the world's second best copper resource at Olympic Dam. First best is Chile, and the Chilean government has just made a whole bunch of royalty changes on miners that is causing a genuine sovereign risk question for future investment in copper in Chile. BHP just bought Oz Minerals for $8 billion at a 40% price premium on what the share market was offering to purchase Oz Minerals shares prior to their entry for a reason. Copper is now BHP's primary, almost arguably only growth play. And that's our resource, that's here. And the rest of the world is going to need a lot more copper. Put a bit of context, the car that you drive home tonight, unless you've already made the switch to an EV, car that you drive has around about 20 kilos of copper in it. An EV has 80 kilos of copper in it. Expand that across every decarbonisation effort, the world needs a lot more copper. Right next to the copper, we have the world's best magnetite resource. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but if you want to make green steel, 9% of all global emissions of carbon, 9% of all global emissions of carbon come from steel production. Steel has to decarbonise globally. They are racing around the world to try and find the solution to this. Green iron and green steel is the answer. You cannot make green iron or green steel out of ordinary iron ore. That's hematite. You've got to use magnetite. Guess who is home to the world's best economic resources of magnetite? We are. Where are we home to that? Just next door to the copper, in the same place that we have the sun and the wind, which is also right next to where we have an existing steelworks, which is also right next to where we can produce hydrogen at a cheaper rate than anywhere else in the world because of that, those resources. So what is the government doing about it? What are we doing to realise the clean energy transition as an economic opportunity for future generations? Well, we choose, the government, we choose to build a $600 million hydrogen electrolyser and power plant in the Upper Spencer Gulf, right adjacent to those other resources that you will own and operate. You being the government, the people of South Australia will own and operate. This is the world's biggest hydrogen electrolyser. We're going to take water, we're going to zap it with renewable energy, electricity, and we're going to turn it into hydrogen. And that is hydrogen that we will then store and use ourselves for domestic purposes. The rest of the world wants and needs this resource. Think about it this way. It's an analogy that I've used repeatedly. Some people might have heard me say it before, but in the 1800s, the Victorians had the gold. The rest of the world wanted and needed it. So they mined it, exported it to the rest of the world. Happy days for Victoria. They've still got a strong economy on the back of it today. Walk around the streets of Melbourne and you see legacy after legacy to the gold mining era. The 20th century defined by, the 20th century defined by New South Wales and Queensland with their coal and natural gas. The 21st century thus far, well, that's been all about Western Australia and iron ore and natural gas. The second half of the 21st century will be about which jurisdiction can produce the clean energy that the rest of the world wants and needs, decarbonised energy. And the hydrogen opportunity is our chance to do that in South Australia for not just hydrogen molecules, but also green iron as well. So that's why we choose to make that investment. For people in the room from DEM or DPC or AGDs that have been working on the piece of legislation that we brought into the Parliament last week that I could get virtually no media interest in whatsoever, which is a world first piece of legislation, the Hydrogen and Renewable Energy Act, takes those vast resources, organises the regulatory environment around it and puts it on the globe. If we pass it through the Parliament, can then start to release those renewable energy zones onto the global market for their investment to dramatically scale up through private investment, that opportunity. And the number of companies that have international investors who are massive movers of global capital, who are interested in that world-leading piece of legislation we've got here in the state parliament at the moment, is very substantial indeed. Now, I can't get anyone in the electorate or in the media to be that interested in any of this. It drives me crazy. People want to talk to me about gather round. They want to talk to me about supercars. They want to talk to me about the golf, and that's fine. I can talk about all those things. But I cannot get people interested in this. But be under no misapprehension that if we want to start to change that economically complexity equation, we can lead the nation in this regard, which is our long-term opportunity. The second element, of course, outside of the clean energy transition, is to improve our economic complexity, is around manufacturing, which is what the Germans and other high complexity economies do. Now, of course, South Australia has always been home to a manufacturing industry, and we went through a very substantial and, quite frankly, traumatic transition out of heavy industry, particularly best depicted by the closure of the automotive manufacturing industry. The good news is that we still have a residual manufacturing industry that is increasingly high-tech and, as a virtue of that, becoming globally competitive. The clean energy transition helps accelerate that effort because the rest of the world wants and needs widgets that have been produced that aren't dependent upon carbon. They want to know, increasingly, well, what was the energy source that helped produce that particular good? And we have got the leadership position on clean energy transition. But the other element, of course, is what is happening to manufacturing in our state on the back of the defence, space and cyber industries, which is real. In other parts of the country, they look at the defence sector and the expenditure that is coming our way, and it creates if not envy, a question mark about whether or not some of those investments are worthwhile. In my view, they absolutely are. But regardless of whether or not you formulate that view, the simple fact is that the work is being done in our state. I mean, 16 kilometres from where we are now, by the end of the decade that we are currently in, we'll be cutting steel on the most complex machines that have ever been built in human history. Fact. There is no more complex machine that has ever been built in the history of humanity than the nuclear submarines that we're going to be building not far from here. That's going to employ 5,000 people direct. You can't, and I've gone and seen this with my own eyes, in Barrow, which is where they build the UK nuclear submarines. I did not appreciate the degree of complexity associated with building these things. They are massive in their scale, and we can all be inspired by that. But you cannot change a light bulb on these submarines without having a nuclear qualification. Everything about them is infinitely more complex for all the safety reasons, amongst others. And we're going to be doing that all here in South Australia. The consequence of that and all the other endeavour around it, in terms of what it does to our economic complexity, is nation shaping, not state changing, nation shaping. So the challenge for us is to take that opportunity and translate it to something that we make real. The key to that is people. And this has always been true to our state. Because we've never had the abundance of natural resources that others have had, we have always had to rely on our most valuable capital, and that is our human capital. So what are we doing? What are you doing in order to realise that opportunity? A massive reform program in terms of education, training and skills. I know I'm over time, Emma, so I'll get there in a second. So we start with the early years. Julia Gillard, former Prime Minister of the nation, weeks ago handed the government its report into early childhood and childhood development to the state government. This is a comprehensive document that provides a roadmap for serious policy change to do a lot more in the early years. Now, all the international research tells us if you're going to spend more money, and it's going to cost more money, if you're going to spend more money, spend in the early years. That's where you get your biggest bang for your buck. 23.8% of South Australian children, when they start school, start with at least one form of childhood developmental delay. 23.8%, almost a quarter. The Royal Commission report has set us the extremely ambitious target of getting that down to 15%, which would make us a national leader. Now, if we want to be building complex machines and leading the world in energy transition, not only do we want that outcome for those individual children, we want that outcome because our economy is going to require every last young person to be fulfilling their potential to be able to contribute to the economic requirement. We start from early childhood preschool, and then we work through the school system, building technical colleges in our high schools, re-implementing the mid-year intake in primary schools, doing everything we can, including around autism support, mental health support, dramatically increasing those resources in our schools. We do that to invest in our human capital, re-establishing TAFE as being a publicly run organisation for the public good, dramatically reinvesting in TAFE, 15,000 free TAFE places. It's a serious skills agenda. Then we get to our universities. We have no top 100 university in the state. We used to, and we should. University amalgamation is not a universally popular policy, but it is this government's determination, in conjunction with the universities themselves, that by bringing them together in a publicly funded university model, which is very different to what we see in the US, that brings with it scale that can result in more R&D and more revenue for the university to be able to invest in the things that matter most. Combined with a policy from the government to allocate perpetual funds to increase the R&D base to get more economic complexity, with a perpetual fund to see more scholarships given to kids from low SES backgrounds and regional communities so they too can experience a higher tertiary qualification, is all about equity and all about improving our economic complexity. So a serious human capital agenda from 3-year-old preschool to public education to TAFE to our universities. Again, apart from a bunch of negative articles in a couple of media outlets, trying to get the public's imagination captured by these big substantial change is very difficult indeed. Final thing I want to round out is this. There is economic metric after economic metric that is being released at the moment showing that South Australia is top of the pops. We've got the fastest growing economy in the nation according to the ABS in the June quarter. We've got an unemployment rate that is lower than the national average for the first time in goodness knows how long. The unemployment rate in the state is 3.6%. Never in our history has it ever been that low. We've got the lowest youth unemployment rate that we've ever had in our history. We've got some of the highest participation rates that have ever been recorded in our history. And the orthodoxy is for me to be telling you how great the state is doing economically, and it is largely true. Except to say this, the truth is that that strong performance is not being enjoyed by everyone. Inflation is high. Wages aren't keeping up with inflation. And that always hurts people who find themselves in low SES or more socially and economically disadvantaged communities most. There is still a very significant cohort of South Australians who, through no fault of their own, find themselves in intergenerational economic disadvantage. And we do have a greater proportion of people in that situation in South Australia than we see in other parts of the country. There is no point in having all the economic opportunity in the world, the lowest unemployment rate in the world, if we are not able to translate that opportunity to a fairer and more equitable society. I read this morning that the US poverty rate is now 12.4%. It's gone up by 7.4% in the last 12 months. The Biden administration increased a whole bunch of social security arrangements that actually saw the poverty rate in the US start to improve, and it's just got worse by 7.4% in the last 12 months. We do not want to be in that position. That is not who we are as a state. So there's a whole range of policies, including, frankly, the Voice to Parliament, that is orientated towards making sure that we can do that effort. I'm not going to start listing them because I'll rabbit on longer than I already have. So, but the key is that endeavour, that social equity endeavour, that opportunity effort, that can only be delivered by government. It is absolutely true that the private sector enable and provide and facilitate opportunity, and for that we should celebrate their efforts and congratulate it and work with them closely. But only government has certain levers at our disposal to assist families and children in those situations. There is no private equivalent of DCP. There is no private equivalent of housing, of public housing. These are things that only government can do. And that's where you come in. So in terms of the breadth and the scale of the agenda, it speaks to a looming challenge that we have as a nation, but it speaks to an opportunity that we have as a state to not just be more advantaged economically in terms of our wealth, but also to be more advantaged about honouring the code, the ambitions that we sign up to as our state in our very founding, and that is to be an equitable, diverse, inclusive society that seeks to provide opportunity to all. So to the extent that you do that day in, day out, in quite frankly, often far more practical ways than me, I want to pass on my sincere gratitude and thank you for all your hard work over the last 12 months to help us implement this agenda, and that's a journey that I look forward to hopefully being on in the months ahead as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Premier. Ditch my questions. I think that's a great idea. I was going to do that, but I was just going to kick off just asking, so that was a call to action. You know, it was very passionate. What would you like to see more of in the public sector? And then I will open it up for questions. So what would you like to see this group do more of to help us get there?
What I've loved most over the last sort of however long I've been in this job, 16, 17 months, is when, and I can think of a number of different examples, like the electorate, the political zeitgeist, political interventions, they have trained caution into the public sector, and in a way that's culturally there, and that I get, right? Because when we make mistakes, it's on the front page of the paper. When a private business makes a mistake, people feel it, and it has a real world impact, but it doesn't necessarily get on the front page of the paper in the way that we can. So there is a caution, but when on occasions I've borne witness to people to not work out, well, here are all the reasons why we can't do something, we're going to work out how we can, then it's liberating, and you're able to do a few things that otherwise might not be able to achieve. And the whole public sector during COVID demonstrated that public sector can be just as can-do as private sector when we choose to have that mentality. So, and that can't be all the time, because we're doing risky things in government. Police, corrections, emergency departments of hospitals, DCP, you name it, it's all risky work. But when there is the opportunity to liberate oneself and think about, this isn't the reasons why we can't do, this is the reason why we can, that is awesome. So whenever that opportunity presents itself, I actively encourage people to take it.
Thank you, Premier. Now, do people have questions? If you can just come up to the microphone, if someone does have a question. While you're doing that, I might ask another one. How's that? I'm sure here's someone. Well done.
I'll be brave and be first. Thank you very much, Premier. My name's Nat Harrison. I work for the Department for Education. I've worked for the one department in government for 37 years. I'm very proud of being a public servant. I'm very proud of the job that I do. Currently, I've worked both in corporate and in schools, and currently I train schools on how to enter the data that we all rely on to make decisions. Just before I ask my question, just wanted to say, love your graphics. And the problem with Australia is we've got no more assets. We've got very little assets. Everything's been sold off. So if you can do what you're saying you're going to do, I'm on that train with you. In fact, I'll be the driver if you like. What I did want to say is that when I joined the public service, which was in the early 80s, public servants were known as being lazy, bludgers. It was a very derogatory term when you got called a public servant. All of us here have worked for many, many years to build that up, to not be referred to as that anymore. But with what's just happened in Canberra lately, where a single person can muddy the name of a public servant again, I'd like to ask you, what is your advice for all of us and the people that aren't in public service, how we can make sure that our name does not get muddied again?
That's a good question. I've trained myself to recoil at the idea that the pandemic changed everything. So I'm not the guy who sympathises with that view. Having said that, when it comes to attitudes towards government and government service delivery, not politicians, I'm talking about government, I do think the pandemic changed a few things. I think it did lift people's eyes a little bit about the importance of public service. When you take you, for instance, you work in education. I don't think there's a parent of young kids around the country that didn't value the role of teachers once they had to be stuck at home and do a bit of home teaching for a few days. So I do think that moved the needle in a positive way. I can't sort of say what I think the perception of public servants is or isn't today, but I do think it's in a better position than it has been in the past. The thing that I like to point out is that risk issue. So, and forgive me if some of you heard me say this before, but when we celebrate success in the private sector, which I'm a fan of doing, we normally, whoever's in charge or acknowledging that, zeroes in on the risk that someone took, right? So an entrepreneur puts their own capital at risk to try and grow a business. And if it works, we celebrate it. Absolutely true. What people don't acknowledge is the risk that government takes on. We say, oh, the private sector takes on all the risk. That is plainly not true. Plainly not true. Because it's government that takes on all the risk that the private sector is not willing to, right? Fire starts in the street. I don't see the private sector jumping in a truck to go and put it out. That's public sector. Crim running around. Cops show up. Public sector. Private sector doesn't go into someone's home and take a vulnerable child away from their parents, which I can imagine must be the most difficult thing that any human being could do. That's public sector. And I go on and on and on. Like, if you have a serious road trauma today, you do not go to a private hospital no matter what your coverage is. You go to the RA because the RA is the one, or you go to a public hospital because they're the only ones that do the really high risk work. So in public sector, you take on risk too. And I've said this at, amongst, over years, I've made this point to people at, the weekend barbecue or whatever, when everyone's sort of decrying the public sector. And you make that point to people, and I find that it's quite effectual and so, oh, yeah, that's sort of true. So public servants take on risk much as private people in the private sector. No one else is willing to do the work that people in the public sector are willing to do, and that is worthy of credit and more regular recognition. And I think when you make that point, people will hear it. And I do think there is greater sympathy to that argument today than what there was maybe in the 80s, but I hope so anyway.
I think the reputation of the public sector was certainly, as you said, complemented with our response to COVID. So thank you for that, Premier. Are there any other people wanting to ask questions? You can stand up and go. Thank you. You can line up so we can make the most of our 6.38 minutes. Thank you. We'll go here, then over there. I'll alternate. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, thank you for your talk, Premier. I've got a question about the hydrogen industry. And I note that you say that the hydrogen that comes from our government-owned plant will be utilised here in South Australia. Certainly, our renewable energy opportunity, if that's going to be used to create hydrogen by private participants that'll then use Port Bonython, how do we try and make sure that those private generators of hydrogen have an obligation to embed that in our manufacturing and make sure that hydrogen doesn't just become another orange box, actually becomes a blue box for South Australia? Sorry.
Such a good question. It's a really instructive question. I've been on a bit of a journey myself. I find that when I'm trying to explain to a layperson about the hydrogen opportunity, that they tend to get more interested in, oh wow, so we can export hydrogen in the future in the way that others export coal. And hopefully that is true. I think we've got a way before we'll get there yet, I've got to say. But hopefully that is true. But the real power, exactly what your point is not exporting it so it becomes another orange box. We want to use it for domestic consumption and domestic industrial purposes. And I guess that's why once we're in the market at the moment, hopefully with an announcement before the end of the year around who we're partnering with to build it, because it's got to be completed by the beginning of 2026. Once we've done that as a government, we can increasingly turn our efforts towards support, when I say support, engagement with industry or policy with industry that lends itself to domestic consumption. The big opportunity in the government's view, and this has progressed over the course of the last 12 months, is in green iron production. So using our magnetite, combining with our hydrogen to make green iron. Now that of course would be a boon because that's us producing the green steel of the future. But the hydrogen can have other industrial applications and industrial uses and people talk about green ammonia amongst others, but anywhere where we see natural gas hydrogen is not a perfect, substitute for, but it often can be, and that's where we see a bit of effort need to be going into in terms of industrial policy. The challenge at the moment, though, is none of that is realisable unless you can produce hydrogen at an economic price, and that is the technological challenge. So first stop is getting the cost of producing hydrogen to be economic and internationally competitive, that's a race that I'm convinced we will win. And then we can start to move about its industrial use domestically from there.
Thank you, Premier. We've got time for the three people that are standing up, and then I think we have to wrap it up. So over here, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Premier. I'm going to try to tie together a few different threads here. So with our envisioned complex economy, we'll need a broader skills base, which I'm assuming will mean some net immigration. I'm going to pull in that thread of housing and the housing crisis. So how do you see population growing and changing and that playing out in the housing sector over the next 10, 20 years or so?
Excellent question. I was planning to get to housing, but I was conscious that I was running out of time. So the state's population is growing at a rate we haven't experienced for a while. That's good, provided that it doesn't compromise our standard of living. So that then goes to infrastructure, and not just infrastructure in terms of roads, although that matters, but hospitals, schools, and everything else. But it also goes to housing. The housing crisis that we've got in the country at the moment is acute. It's not an economic challenge. It's a social challenge. As a government, we are trying to do everything we can to address this. I've made it clear that health and housing remain our priorities. So without giving you a shopping list that's too long, but biggest land release in the history of the state, trying to change taxation arrangements to incentivise the building of new homes, particularly for first homeowners, planning reform, investing in trunk infrastructure in a way that it hasn't happened in the past, which will become increasingly complex. These are measures, amongst others, that we're trying to do as quickly as we can, but public housing is the one that I care about most. Again, the one I probably ask and care about most is often the least interest. If I put a Facebook post up on land release, people are interested. If I put it up about public housing, tragically they are not. But for 29 of the last 30 years in the state of South Australia, we've been selling off our public housing stock. We've had 29 of the last 30 years, we've had a net reduction in each of those years in public housing stock in South Australia. For a piece of work between the Treasurer, Minister Cook, Minister Champion, we said, right, that's got to end. We've turned that around. We've stopped the sell-off of public housing stock. If anyone hears from Housing SA knows of a piece of land that is being sold, I want to know about it, because it's not supposed to be happening. We are not selling off stock anymore, and instead we're increasing the net volume of public housing stock, which is long overdue in this state. So we're trying to do everything we can, but the housing challenge is going to be with us for a while. I don't want to mislead people. All these things that we're doing, particularly around land release and rezoning, you can't release land today and have the house built on it by the end of the year. It takes time. And that's desperately frustrating from my perspective. But the housing challenge is going to be with this country for some time. And I think that's true in our state. So there is no lever that we're not willing to pull. Just on the weekend, we're changing the law and regulations so that people who've got a granny flat sitting idle in their backyard can now be leased, which many councils were preventing. So there is nothing we're not willing to do. We're changing rental regulations. We've got landlords a bit unhappy at us about a few of those things. So sorry for anyone that's a property mogul. But we have to see a recalibration in the rental market, because at the moment it's so unequal in favour of the landlord over the would-be tenant that exacerbates inequity. So we're trying to do everything we can, regardless if it's a little bit controversial, because this is a big challenge, and we don't realise all the opportunities unless we have the people to build the things. that are coming, and we don't have the people, and if we don't have a house for them to live in. So this is one that occupies the government's mind in a big way.
Thank you, Premier. Now, I do want the two people to ask their questions. If you can make it quick, that'd be really great, so the Premier can respond.
Yes, so my name's Gabriel. I'm a data guy, so I appreciated the visuals, but like most people here, I do note you got these visuals from Harvard. I was sort of expecting after Germany, after Canada, after Australia to see one for SA, but I'm hoping that is something that you have a plan to deliver on in the future, because I think it will be a great way for us to actually see the measurable impact of all these initiatives that you've listed. And they do say a visual paints 1,000 words. And I think the media will take that up a lot more as well, because you did point that was a focus point.
Which department do you work in?
I'm actually representing a federal department. I'm with the Australian Taxation Office.
Okay, good. Well, you can tell DTF that they've got to, I was going to say, if you're in DTF, you can do it for us then. So the only, I'm aware that Deloitte were playing around with economic complexity on a jurisdictional basis within Australia. I haven't seen that work, but I'm aware that they're either doing it or have just only recently done it, and that's something that we should familiarise ourselves with. But your point's a well-made one. I haven't seen that graph breaking down on a state-by-state jurisdiction. It wouldn't be a bad thing to measure ourselves by.
Well, stay back behind. We'll grab your name. We have the Commonwealth also represented at IPA events. Welcome. Thank you. And the last question.
Hi, thanks for attending today. And I'd just like to ask what the plan is for TAFEs and universities and the school sector as well in terms of its growth. I've been working in the education sector for at least 15 years. I've moved from university to TAFE to schools, so I've been everywhere. I'm back at TAFE, and I've heard some discussion from the director of TAFE that we're planning to build more education hubs that incorporate TAFE and university and lead from TAFE to university. I'd just like to know your plans and your thoughts on that.
Well, so I think former governments of both political persuasions have underinvested in VET or TAFE. I think there's been policy failings of the past around TAFE, again, including from my side of politics as much as the others. So, I don't think anyone can sort of have a degree of sanctity about this from the political class. But we are in desperate need to reinvest in vocational education training more broadly, just because the demand on skills that we have now, let alone what we're going to have in 5 short years' time. In terms of specific plans, we are growing TAFE and reinvesting in TAFE to reflect that ambition. I wish I had the numbers on the top of my head, and I'm trying to recall them as I'm speaking to you, and I can't, but there has been a significant uplift in the value of the public investment from the budget towards TAFE, reopening classes, re-establishing courses that were previously closed down. We're currently undertaking a piece of work in conjunction with the Commonwealth around additional courses that we need to do yet again through TAFE around manufacturing in particular, electrical trades, construction trades, you could list them all, that aren't there in the volume that they need to be just to be able to accommodate the naval shipbuilding effort. So, and I've already mentioned the technical colleges piece, which is a great entree for young people at school age who are going to complete their SACE but not necessarily go to university, to be able to follow that pathway through. So we are, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of new money investment, and we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul to achieve those investments either. So we're all in this regard, and I suspect, and I'm not going to start announcing policy today, but I suspect this is an area that government is going to have to continue to renew its effort and investment in, just because of the size of the challenge that we have at hand.
please join me in thanking the Premier. We are 5 minutes over. Premier, thank you very much for being here. Look out for future events that IPA has. We've got one with Professor Sharon Parker talking about productivity. I want to thank you all for coming today, and please give us some feedback about how we might make this even bigger and better. Premier, thank you very much.